I thought that psalm was appropriate. It is wonderful because there are two halves to it. One speaks of how God speaks through creation, and the other section is how God speaks through the law. For the Old Testament readers, the law. For us, the Bible, how God speaks through His Word and how we learn. And of course, it has that wonderful verse about the promises being precious as gold, which links in nicely with Gold Project, but just the whole idea that God's Word is valuable, precious, and important to each of us. So I thought that was just a helpful way of us starting our day together, and just spending a moment reflecting on those verses. So welcome everyone. What we plan to do today is this is a day for you, and a day for you to learn together. So I'm going to do some input, but there's going to be quite a lot of time for you to work in groups. If you haven't met us before, you're most welcome. There are people here who know about Gold Project. Please chat to them in the break. What we're planning to do is to have half an hour of input, then quarter of an hour in discussion, and then we will have our coffee break. So that's what we're planning to do now. Today is the first of 3 study days, all on small group Bible study, and we're hoping. So this is going to be. There are going to be 2 more, one in September and one in November. Although Amanda keeps thinking it's in December. So the last one is on November the 25th, not December the 25th. I can't remember the date for the second one. It's September the 27th. So that one is a weekday one, and that one's going to be on Zoom. And we've already got some people lined up to give input who will join us on Zoom. And I'm hoping that we'll get some people, well, maybe recorded, but some people from other parts of the world to help us in that day. So as we'll be on Zoom, it's quite nice that we can incorporate some people from other parts of the world also. So that's what we're doing. So we're starting with this, start as you intend to go on. So let's start our small group Bible studies in the way that we want them to continue. And that's the sort of focus of today. And then we're going to, in that, we're going to start with this question of the post-alpha challenge, which I don't know whether you find that there's a post-alpha challenge, but I'm going to suggest that there is a post-alpha challenge. Whether we like that or not, I'm going to do that. So in our first session, we're going to talk about what do we do after alpha, and what do we do in our churches. So Jesus called ordinary people to follow him from all walks of life. They followed Jesus as he travelled from place to place. These earliest followers of Jesus are simply referred to as disciples. Jesus was their teacher, and they learnt from him day by day. As with any other Jewish rabbi, Jesus taught them to understand and live out the scriptures. And this is an interesting thing because Jewish rabbis, their main role was to interpret the scriptures to their followers, and then for their followers to follow their interpretation. So too, each of us who've responded to Jesus' invitation to follow him need to learn from him in the company of other disciples. So one of the things that we're going to try and suggest today is that discipleship is not individual. Yes, it's personal, but it is never individual. So we are learning together from others in our discipleship. For many years, discipleship was not an issue that was even discussed in the church in the UK. However, in the last 10 years probably, it's become something of a buzzword. Where no one spoke about it, now nearly every church sees it as important. And even the Church of England has discipleship as a key issue on its agenda. I think most denominations now are talking about discipleship in the UK. But what do we mean by discipleship? we'll come on to in a minute. I'm going to give a definition, and you're most welcome to disagree with my definition. I don't mind that. It's just a definition to start us going in the conversation, okay? Just as an aside, I'm always happy for people to disagree with our courses and things, but then you have to say why you disagree. Most dioceses have at least one person nominated as their key discipleship enabler now, or something similar, and you see that in other churches as well. We, in the Gold Project, believe that one of the most significant ways that people can do this is in small group Bible study. So in this series of study days, we'll be offering the opportunity to think through the role of small group Bible study in equipping believers for everyday life. How do we make that connection between what we do in our small group Bible study and everyday life? So today we're focusing on the basics, and we'll reflect together on the opportunities and challenges that basic discipleship courses like Alpha offer us. We'll spend time considering what we mean by biblical discipleship, and we'll have an opportunity to think through how we make biblical discipleship accessible to everyone. So that's my introduction over, except this bit. Here's my definition, and as I say, you can disagree with it, but don't challenge it now, because there's going to be an opportunity to challenge it later. So I'm just going to say that discipleship is a lifelong process of learning what it means to follow God's call to be his people and to live as he wants us to in every aspect of our lives. I'll repeat that. Discipleship is a lifelong process of learning what it means to follow God's call to be his people and to live as he wants us to in every aspect of our lives. And you'll notice that my definition deliberately at this point doesn't refer to following Jesus. That's not because I don't think following Jesus is important in discipleship, but I think that if we just say following Jesus, we can get caught in our New Testament bubble and think that the rest of the scriptures don't have anything to say to us. So that's why I've left Jesus out of my definition. Something wrong there. But that's why Jesus is not referred to in this definition, but we can discuss that a little later. So what I want to do now is to just spend a little time, and this is going to be interactive, talking about the strengths and weaknesses of Alpha and other similar courses. So over the last 30 years, one of the most significant contributions to discipleship in our churches has been the development and use of simple courses such as Alpha and Christianity Explored. There are some other ones out there as well. What's the right phrase? Other courses are available. But many of our churches have adopted such courses, and particularly Alpha, not only to disciple new believers, which was their original purpose. Interestingly, Alpha started as a discipleship course and now has become an evangelistic course, which is interesting. But also, so they've also become tools of evangelism to allow people a safe place to discuss the basics of the Christian faith and to raise their questions about the Christian faith. So what we're going to start to do by doing now is to reflect on what we can learn from Alpha, the Alpha course for ongoing discipleship in our churches. I want you to list to me, list to me what you think are the strengths of Alpha. And I'm going to try and write them in a way that you, if you want to write, my wife's got very legible writing. This is Angie, my wife, if you don't know her.
And you can stand there and I can write.
What do we think are the strengths of Alpha? I've got a whole load listed here, but I'm not interested in my list. I want to know what you think.
A meal in a home.
A meal in a home, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Opportunity to ask difficult questions.
Good.
Like the group environment, so being
Group environment.
similar, like Christians of a similar ilk, I guess.
Group.
I'll move out of the way, you can see it in a minute.
We need left-handed person.
Yeah.
Clear, but the way they present it is very slick.
Clear presentation, yeah.
It's
It's also professionally done, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Holy Spirit Day. I think so strong.
What was that, Amanda?
Holy Spirit
Day.
yeah. Or even some people have a weekend, didn't they?
Yeah, something like
I
weekend.
think it was supposed to be a weekend, wasn't it? To start with.
It was meant to be weekend to start off with. Now we limit the Holy Spirit
Anyway.
to 4 hours.
Good. Anyone else?
All welcome.
All welcome, yeah. And I think that also links in that chance to ask difficult questions, doesn't it? They're all welcome, and actually you can come with the questions you have. Yeah.
It's sort of logical and reasoning, so it appeals to a scientific mind.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Which we'll see whether that's also a weakness.
Oh.
But yes, yeah. But it is. It's very well argued.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anything else anyone wants to add?
It has books attached to it, if you like. I'm not quite sure how you want to phrase that, but
Yeah, resources. The books
resources.
Tangible resources?
Yeah.
Something like that.
There's no baggage, because it was a long time ago when I saw it, but I got the impression the person who was presenting it wasn't coming from us. He wasn't claiming ownership to a specific
Yeah. So
identity. He was trying to work it through logically from a questioning point of view, without saying I'm Jewish or I'm starting from this position, which would appeal to a lot of people because.
So in some ways it's unbiased. Is that
Yeah,
what I'm saying?
unbiased. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a word for it. Yeah, unbiased.
And I think one of the key things to Alpha has been, because of that to a certain extent, it's been used in all different types of churches. You know, so it's been acceptable to all different churches.
It works up to the Holy Spirit weekend day.
Okay, so
What was that?
it's building up.
They build it up and
Yeah,
then it
okay,
gets
so
to that
in
point.
some
I
way-
mentioned the Holy Spirit day. Oh, you've done it.
but
I
in some way-
missed that. Sorry.
But it's well structured,
Yeah.
so you're building up to a.
I'm squeezing them in now. We're running out of space.
I think it's worldwide as well, which is so good, and
Yeah.
written in different, appropriate for different groups.
I'm running out. I'm running out.
Okay.
I have to go to the weaknesses. Worldwide.
Sorry about
that. I can't bend down far enough
Okay,
yet.
good. So I think these are some significant things that when we're starting to talk about what do we do after Alpha, we need to say, is there a way that, what of these things can we replicate and what can't we? And what are the good things that we can learn and use in our small group Bible study? You know, there's some things that are very easy to continue to do, like the meal and the hope. I mean, it's not, it takes work, but it's not something, you know, we don't need a professional video person to keep that sort of thing going. So there's some things like that. You know, the opportunity to ask difficult questions is not something that we need to stop with Alpha. And I think this is one of the things that people find difficult when they finish their Alpha group. They're told, oh, you've now become a Christian, don't ask questions. Now that seems to me to be one of the things that we want to avoid. Actually, you know, your questions are part of the way you grow. And if we read the Gospels, how Jesus interacted with his disciples, asking sometimes the dumbest questions, but sometimes some actually inspiring questions. But all of those questions tell us something more about Jesus. So, you know, actually, there's always an opportunity in a question. You know, so the group environment is not something that's difficult to replicate. So what I'm saying is suggesting that when you're thinking about your small groups in your churches, to look through this list and say, well, what are the things we can do, whatever course we choose to take, or not course, whatever we choose to take, what can we take, and what would we like to take from it? let's just ask the weaknesses then.
You get a group together for a purpose, but there's nothing for that group to go into.
Okay.
Most churches don't seem to have a structure move on from Alpha.
Is that a weakness of Alpha, or is that a weakness of...
That's the
Oh,
weakness
it's
of our churches.
It's
Yes.
the weakness of the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's also a weakness of Alpha, because Alpha brings a group together for a purpose, rather than necessarily linking in with the wider
So
church.
if we're thinking about lifelong discipleship, it is a weakness, because where do you go next? But it's not a weakness of Alpha course. As you say, it's quite right. It's a weakness of what we provide to
Yes.
Yeah. Good. Next.
The professionalism is off-putting to people who are unsure of themselves.
Yeah.
Or shy.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Because it's very business-like, isn't it?
Yes, it's particular.
And I would want to add that about the logical reason,
Yes.
academic type of approach that is off-putting to some people, because they don't speak in that way.
I think using it as an evangelistic tool
Is a
implies
weakness.
is a weakness. Because it's like, well, we bring them in for evangelists, we've done that bit, so you've either got to find your way into the church or something else.
So you mean?
I think if it was the start of a discipleship program, then that would be different from just using it as a one-off evangelism thing.
Okay, that's interesting.
I think
Anyone else?
phrase one-off is crucial there, because that also applies to the what to do next. Alpha implies it's a one-off, which is what you're also saying here. And what we've got to do is, we want Alpha to say, well, where do you go next? And it isn't. So that's where we...
Yeah. Another weakness is often not integrated with the existing groups and churches.
Okay, David knows what I'm going to say next.
Shut up.
Anyone other than David?
In our experience, we found that people perceive it wrongly to be exclusively C of E.
Okay, that's interesting. Because it comes from Holy Trinity Brompton. Okay.
The other challenge is Alpha about Christianity, or is it about faith in God?
Okay.
And it's not. Is it right for us to say, well, it should then be handed over to the Christian church, because actually we're a multi-faith country and we want people to have faith.
Okay.
And
So
that's probably why they've
too
avoided
So
that.
you're asking, is it too exclusive?
Yeah, too exclusive.
But is it also the questions that it asks are about the meaning of life?
Yeah, but they're basic questions that apply to
Interesting.
everything.
Interesting.
Does it give you an opportunity? We've had two people come through Alpha. One's committed their life to God. They did grow up in a Christian environment, so they knew kind of what a Christian was. The other one didn't know what sin was or what a Christian was, and hasn't committed their life at the moment, but I've been working with them. It was quite interesting to find out they didn't know what sin was, and they've come through Alpha. So I think, does it give you the opportunity to commit your life to God? Does it explain, how can I know God as a Christian? I'm not sure, because I've done Alpha for years.
Don't know how to write that.
No, so that was another thing. That was a sort of question as well as is that a weakness?
So is it asking for a decision, or is it left?
Yeah.
Are you saying there's questions left unanswered?
Yeah. Does it give you a clear opportunity to become a Christian at the end of it?
But then you could decide something else as well, and still be appropriate, yeah?
I'm not sure that's done Alpha for years.
No.
I
Okay.
haven't done Alpha, but it's a question. Is it open-led or is it more dictative?
Okay, that's an interesting question.
Let me can I just summarise what Amanda said? Does it lead to an opportunity for commitment? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
the other question is it open? Is it open or is it? I can't.
Dictative.
Yeah.
Or
So.
Is it open or closed?
Yes.
Is it prescriptive?
Well done.
Is that a word?
Yeah.
I've never done it, but I feel like it must be. It might. It feels like it. I don't know.
I think
It
the
feels
videos are
open.
sometimes.
Oh,
The
really?
videos are a little bit like with the logical bit, but my experience in the group is it's very open
Yeah.
afterwards.
And that's so. I think one of the things we haven't. So the group environment is actually really key to it working well.
Mm.
You know, actually, and one of the things that I haven't. I've got a couple of things in my list that we haven't put up here, but one of the things is about the role of the facilitator. So it's not only group discussion, it's facilitated group discussion, and you need someone in that group who can facilitate it well. So if it's facilitated well, the group discussion can be brilliant. If it's not,
So I'm going to write facilitated across the bottom and across both.
so group,
Because it is fairly
so
crucial.
facilitated group discussion, it's actually quite key what the facilitated role is.
So that's both a strength and it does depend.
Okay, good. I think we'll stop there, but keep those things in mind as we go through today. And I'm going to, Angie, just stay there a minute, because I want another strengths and weaknesses thing.
You've got 10 minutes.
I know I have. So I've got to do this very quickly, but I don't know how many of us have small group Bible studies in our church. But other than Alpha, I just want us to very briefly say what are the strengths and weaknesses of our small group Bible studies or our experience of small group Bible studies.
They can try to do too much, and that they're
Yeah, okay.
Bible teaching, praying, pastoral care, social.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Trying to fit that into an hour and a half.
Yeah, that's true.
They're often more intimate, which I guess leads to
relationships.
Sorry?
they're more intimate, so
Okay.
it leads to more open discussions and
So that's a strength, presumably.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, depends how intimate you want to be in your
So
church
you
group.
get to know well one group
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah, okay.
But that's also a weakness because people, once they're in that small group, don't want to be moved
Okay,
to
so it
another
can become a clique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the downside of a good.
And sometimes just one or two voices dominate.
Yep. One or two voices dominate.
David. What else? He knows me and Alison probably do. I talk
I
a
do
lot.
show you application, Andy. Or ask other people the question, just like David.
Yeah.
You'll have to teach me how to do that.
I guess the material, how does it take you deeper into your faith, or is it just a quick 5-6 week study?
Shallow.
Well, so there's a question of the material could be a strength or a weakness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay,
The material
I'm
you
going to put
choose.
that across here, like I did for the other one.
There's two things in my mind. One is it's quite informal, so that can open up a variety of discussion. And I suppose a weakness is it's not structured, so you tend to try and have to think of something new to talk about, and you don't always get ideas. So the facilitator's then grabbing at whatever he can get his hands on to talk about something that's going to stimulate the group.
Which is our discussion at breakfast time this morning. What on earth are we going to do Wednesday evening?
Yeah.
We
that's
had that conversation this morning.
Another problem is
With our small group.
with the groups, and we stopped one group because I knew what everybody was going to say before we even asked the question. We'd been so close, we were all similar in age and style.
Echo chamber.
Yes, it just defeated the object. It's both a strength because you get to know people and you can share, but it's a weakness because actually, how do you break that group up
Yes.
so that the expertise or knowledge is shared between in a wider congregation?
Too predictive.
Stagnant.
Stagnant.
Yeah, you stop growing.
Get stagnant, that's a good word.
Okay, great. I'm going to go on then.
Because I think the strength is when people want to be real and apply the learning to their own lives. Otherwise, there's an escape into theology, as it were. And
yeah, okay. So,
what's it just say?
So it can just be, it can be a theological discussion that doesn't apply to life. I think that's what.
Yeah.
So
that's
it's just a head knowledge discussion, and it doesn't actually apply to our lives.
Yeah. Strength is the pastoral support that it can provide within the group.
Yeah.
Good. I'm going to have to move on because my wife's keeping time for me. So these are all significant things, and I think one of our key things is the question of how do we. So today we're trying to look at how do we enable group Bible study to be a tool for people's everyday discipleship. How do we enable that to become a really helpful tool for systematic, ongoing discipleship? So we've done that. So how do we take people beyond Alpha or Christianity Explored? How do we develop pathways for lifelong learning so that people can actually continue to learn as Christians, remembering that the word disciple actually is about learning? What is the role of group-based Bible study in this process? And that's going to be our discussion in groups in a moment. Obviously at Gold Project we've got things that we think are tools to help in that process, and we'll talk about those a bit later. But the time today is for you to reflect for your church, for your situation, actually how can we enable our small groups to enable people to be the people Jesus wants them to be in their daily lives. And that's the key question. I'm just going to very briefly talk about culture. What do we mean by discipleship culture? A colleague of mine in India called culture the smell of the place. So when you come into a place, you smell, there's something about the smell, isn't it? Angie and I watch this Bangers and Cash on the telly because we don't have enough time in our lives. So we... and he opens the door of a car and he says, "That smells right." So how do we? So discipleship. Culture is something that defines a place in a way that you can't actually define it. You know, how do you define a smell? But when you go into somewhere, you can smell it. So if it's a good smell and pervades everything, that's great. But as anyone who lives near Avonmouth will know, that when the wind is in a certain direction, it brings the aroma of the sewage works into your house. For us, it's when the wind's in the north, we get this smell in the morning. And it pervades everything. So Paul uses this image about us as Christians, and especially of the role of the apostles when he says, we are the aroma of Christ. And actually, so how do we create a culture of discipleship where people smell Jesus in the place when they come in? And through our discipleship groups, people smell something different. I'm going to try, if possible, to play you a little video. If it works.
The trickiness with an introduction to a Christian book on culture is how to think about culture. Everybody tends to choose one aspect of culture and make it the controlling factor for all of culture. So for the longest time in the Christian tradition, we have this idea of worldview, didn't we? Which we took to mean that ideas drive everything. If you want to really understand a culture, you've got to understand how it thinks. And of course, there's a very deep and helpful truth in that. But culture is not just about ideas, and so there was a pushback against that idea. And said, no, we've got to include...
That actually impacts on all these different areas of life. All the things that surround us as part of culture. So time and space, interestingly, the whole idea of how you do things in the week. So one of the questions is our discipleship a daily thing, or is it only a weekly thing where you show up at church? Is it a daily thing? So we've got to be thinking about how all these things interact with our world. So how discipleship affects all these areas, if we're going to talk about culture. So if we're going to change culture, we've got to see how the Bible relates to all of those things. If we believe the Bible is important, how does it relate to all those things? And we'll talk a little bit about that after the break.
And you can try that, but
it's difficult to encourage people to be in small groups.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. Anything else from your group?
We didn't like the term biblical discipleship.
Okay, so we can talk about that in the next session, that's fine. Good. This group who are here, did you have anything you want to feedback? You don't have to.
I think something Rich saying about people are on such different places after they've gone through Alpha. And so it's not necessarily that they're ready to go into
holding
discipleship.
people in a wide range of where they're at in terms of their journey.
Make sure they don't get just drawn. I mean, that's the worst thing I think is when people have done Alpha and then there's nowhere for them to go.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's quite tricky. People are at different levels and they're not quite ready to commit to becoming a Christian, but they're still asking questions. So.
And I think that is a real challenge, isn't it? Because where do you go from Alpha? Part of it depends on who you are and what you need. So it's not just a one-answer question. Yeah. Good. Anything else from your group?
Just following that, we spoke about just making sure that we create opportunities for people to grow as well. So whether that's through other courses or just service in the church.
Yeah.
Making sure that people don't just finish Alpha and then it's okay, get on with it. It's what are those steps, and we spoke about stepping stones to continue to grow in faith.
And I think, for me, I think that always, when you come to the end of something, even if it's just a Bible study course, it's always helpful to say to your group or whoever is in it, to say, well, what do we do next? Or to have a plan so that people know where you're going. Great. How about your group? I know you're all spread out again, but that's fine.
Karen's got the list.
Well, I've got the list, but I think
we certainly said that one as well, didn't we? How to provide for different sets of people.
yes, and also for the facilitators, so that where we talked about mentorship and supervision for supervisors as well.
I mean, there is a key role for the facilitator, and in Alpha, often you're given that role for a short period. Question is, who's going to take on that role afterwards for those people? So, you can develop quite deep relationships even in an Alpha course, and then the Alpha course finishes, so who then carries on supporting and encouraging those people? So it's not just a question of the end of the course, it's a question of who actually has that role.
Well, I think we also said something about studying in service, but also different, even social activities like coffee mornings and toddler groups, and varying where the venues are, so that people who feel nervous about a church building could go to a home or a cafe or somewhere else, and other people who have been scared of church come to a toddler group in church and lose their fear. So it's changing up venues as well.
So I think it's always helpful to have something else that you can invite people to and take them on, and it's thinking in encouraging ways about that. What's appropriate for each person. Thank you, everyone. We're going to move on to our second session now, and this is where we are going by biblical discipleship. My first question is, what is the role of the Bible in discipleship? And that may seem a strange question to you. I started the last session by suggesting that discipleship has now become a buzzword. Everyone wants to talk about discipleship. Everyone wants to talk about what it means to follow Jesus. And of course, if you
Sorry, David, to interrupt. When we say everybody, do we mean the church leadership? So we're all busy talking about it, because I've not heard much of it in churches generally.
Okay, not everyone wants to talk.
It's just an observation.
Okay, no, you're probably right. But discipleship is becoming a thing that lots of people are talking about in churches and in church structures and leadership. So, and you've got organisations such as LICC, which used to be the London Institute for Contemporary Christianity. It still is, but everyone knows it as LICC now. They've been at the forefront of challenging the church to think through issues of faith on the front line, what it means to be a disciple in everyday life. And the work of LICC fed into a big discussion in the Church of England. I'm sure it's fed into other discussions in other denominations, but they played a part in this report on setting God's people free, and the idea that actually the church should be enabling Christians to live their lives as disciples every day. So now if you go on a diocesan website, you'll either see something about everyday faith or you'll see something about discipleship. So the Church of England has got this all over the place on its publicity. But interestingly, I've been in several groups which, when you discuss discipleship, don't seem to think the Bible has anything to do with discipleship. It's just about following Jesus, whatever that means. So this session we're going to look a bit more at discipleship in terms of what does the Bible have to say about discipleship, and is the Bible important in discipleship? So of course there have been other resources that have come up recently, really helpful resources like the 365 prayer network and some of the resources that they're doing which give daily Bible readings and daily prayer. There's something called Lectio 365 that people are using. Of course there are older materials from Bible Reading Fellowship and others that are there for daily discipleship and Bible reading. And the course Holy Habits, which is now also part of BRF, Bible Reading Fellowship, is there to encourage living Christian life in day-to-day Christian life. So what is the role of the Bible in discipleship? What role do small groups play in discipleship? So there's two different questions here. What role do small groups play in discipleship, and what is the role of small group Bible study in discipleship? Because there are quite a lot of people who are talking about small groups, the fellowship and all the things that go on in a small group, fellowship, pastoral care, even mission, but actually the Bible has been left to be a very small part, if anything, in that group. So what is the role of the Bible and Bible study in that whole thing? Those are the questions that we're asking. Let's stand back to begin with and talk about the role of the Bible in discipleship. Let's start with the Old Testament. So you remember my definition didn't talk about Jesus, because I think discipleship actually goes through the whole Bible. However, disciple and discipleship are not really terms that are used in the Old Testament. If you use the NIV, the term only occurs in Isaiah 8:16 and 19:11, where it translates the word limud, which is one who learns. It's also a similar word is used in Isaiah 50 about people being, 50 verse 4, about people being accustomed to doing something. So it has an idea of a habit there, people being accustomed to do things. And there are two occurrences in Jeremiah which... So if the term is so rare in the Old Testament, can we really refer to discipleship in the Old Testament? And here we need to remember there is an important difference between the occurrence of a word and the occurrence of a concept in the Bible. For example, the word Trinity does not occur in the Bible at all. Nevertheless, the concept of God revealing himself as Father, Son and Holy Spirit is fundamental to our faith and is actually a biblical concept, even though the word is not there. And this is where we can clearly argue with people who say, well, Trinity doesn't come in the Bible. That's nonsense. Trinity as a word doesn't come in the Bible, but Trinity as a concept comes in the Bible. So if the term discipleship doesn't come in the Old Testament much, does the concept come in the Old Testament? And the term, so the concept of learning is fundamental to the Old Testament. The people of God are constantly learning. So the verb is there, lomed, in the Old Testament, to learn. And the idea of being taught by God and learning to obey Him is a concept that runs right the way through the Old Testament. The verb occurs about 90 times. And interestingly, is a particular focus of Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy, just go to Deuteronomy 9, verse 4. You are going to be using your Bibles more a bit later. Deuteronomy, what did I say? 9. It was the wrong way round. It's Deuteronomy 4, verses 9 and 10. So this is Moses speaking. Only be careful and watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things that your eyes have seen or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. And then remember the day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb when you said, assemble the people before me to hear my words so that they may learn to revere me as long as they live in the land and may teach them to their children. Now, the interesting thing about the Hebrew language is that the word learn and teach are actually the same verb. They're slightly different. So they're different forms of the verb. So you learn what you're taught and you teach what you learn. Or something like that. So that idea of learning is fundamental to the whole process of Deuteronomy. And interestingly, learning is not only learning new things, it's learning not to forget, which is something we tend to think of learning as something like, I'm learning something new. But in the Bible, actually, we also learn not to forget. And we're taught not to forget. So part of our learning process is reminding ourselves not to forget things, as well as learning new things. So I'm going to just do a very brief overview of the Old Testament. The call of Abraham, Genesis 12, is a clear call that is, I think, a call to discipleship. Abraham's called to leave his family. This is Genesis 12, 1 to 3. He's called to leave his home and his family. But he's also called to leave with his family, which is interesting. So he leaves his homeland. He leaves certain members of the family, but other members of the family he takes with him, which is quite an interesting concept for discipleship when actually it's not an individual thing. Abraham leaves with his flocks and his herds, and he gets more flocks and herds and travels as he goes along. Interestingly, the call of Abraham becomes the basis of God's blessing for the rest of the world. So he's called to be blessed and to be a blessing for others. And I think as an example of discipleship, Abraham's a fascinating example of someone who spends his life learning and failing and learning again and doing all sorts of things wrong, and yet following what God wants him to do and being blessed and becoming a blessing. And he's quite a contradictory character, but actually for us I think he's quite an encouraging character, because he messes it up, but he's clearly called to do what God wants. And sometimes he's an amazing man of faith, and the next moment he's deserting his wife with a foreign king. And so actually, as an example of real life discipleship, Abraham is a great example for us, because I think he shows the good and the bad and the ugly of what it is to be a disciple. Moving on to Exodus 19, and I think Exodus 19 is key for our Old Testament understanding of discipleship. And there, it's the calling of the people of God. And the calling of the people of God is to be holy. So God calls people into relationship with him, and it's based on his grace. I can't even find Exodus in my Bible, which shows.
Page 76.
Thank you.
Thank you. What verse are we doing?
I'm just. So when we go to verses 5 and 6. So verse 4. We'll start with verse 4. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. This wonderful grace, how God brought the people and carried them as his people. So it's all by grace. But then it says, now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And then, of course, we go on to talking about the whole of the law and the giving of the law. And in chapter 20, we come on to these 10 commandments. So as the people who are called by God, we need to learn what it is to obey God. And that comes through there. But the interesting thing, again, it's a call to holiness, to being a different people. And that discipleship involves being different from the world around us. And of course, 1 Peter takes up this in terms of the church. So 1 Peter, you are chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, is echoing exactly these words from Exodus, that we as the church are called to this holy lifestyle to live together. So what I'm trying to say here is that discipleship is about a community, and it's about a community living and learning as a community to obey what it is, to learn what it is to obey to God in our lives. So it's a community-based discipleship. I think, and you may disagree with me, I think Leviticus is all about discipleship. And I think Leviticus is all about whole life discipleship. The point about Leviticus is that God's law has an impact on every single aspect of our lives. And so these funny laws that we look at and think, that's really weird, I don't understand that. What's happening there is they're saying that actually what you eat is important. Actually, even what you wear is important. And interestingly, this is the debate now, isn't it, with our eco-friendly, and fair trade and stuff. Actually, what we wear is important. Is it abusing people? Is it, So the whole question, as Christians, our lives, every single aspect of our lives is affected by who we are as Christians, and that's what Leviticus is about. You can get caught up in some of the strange laws there. So how we worship is part of our discipleship. That's in Leviticus. What we eat is part of our discipleship. And we may not have the same food laws as the Jews, but actually, more and more we're realizing that actually what we eat impacts the world around us. And actually as Christians we need to think about what we eat, not just eat whatever is given to us. What we wear, how we treat our fellow human beings, even how we treat our animals. All these come in Leviticus. How we treat the land, sexual relationships, all these things are all about who we are as the people of God. So I think Leviticus is a book about discipleship in the Old Testament, and we might want to then look at it and think, actually, there's something that Leviticus can teach us today. We've looked at Deuteronomy. I'm going to say that Deuteronomy is all about learning to obey God, but particularly in the family. If you go to Deuteronomy 6, teaching your children and your children's children, and how do we make that discipleship go? How do we learn? Abusing the poor, all these sorts of things are things that will ultimately be bad for you. So historical books, the Psalms, I think, wonderful stories for disciples. Wonderful prayers of praise, lament, things that joy, sorrow, anger, praise, all of those are appropriate responses for disciples. And so I think they affect our discipleship. Shall I go on? Let me tell you about Proverbs, because I think Proverbs is about memes. I think if you're on Facebook and you keep seeing these little memes that come up, and you think, yeah, that's true, isn't it? But it's only true for a certain thing, isn't it? So you get these little memes come up, and you think, hey, that's really cool, and you share it, and then someone tries to analyse it and debate it, and actually it doesn't work. Because it only works for a certain thing, and that's what the Proverbs are. They're little memes for life. We can, the fear of God is beginning of wisdom. That's obviously a meme that is general and it remains true forever. But there's other memes in Proverbs that, like a nagging wife is like a dripping tap.
You should pick that one, isn't it?
That's because our tap was dripping and I had to fix it. And then, the prophets, all about justice and all those things. If our justice and idolatry and all those things, if that's not about discipleship, what is, actually they're talking about things that are important to God. So I'm going to move on. New Testament. Discipleship in the Gospels. This is obviously the place where we mainly think about discipleship. And the word disciple is actually used in the Gospels and Acts 272 times, apparently, if you like to know those things. And it translates the word mathetes. And mathetes really refers to a student or a pupil. It's someone who learns. So if we're going to talk about discipleship, we've got to think about learning. We've got to think about education. We've got to if I'm going to be a disciple, I've got to be willing to learn. And I think we can talk about disciple, and in English it also, the word involves discipline. It involves if you're going to be a disciple, it involves some effort. And in a lot of the discussions I see going around about discipleship, it's a very woolly thing. It's nice to follow Jesus. Where are you in your pilgrimage? And it's like anyone can be anywhere. But actually, there is a certain sense in which a disciple is a structured thing. It's a learning thing. It's a discipline thing. And being a disciple of a rabbi was not an easy job. You were meant to memorize the teaching of the rabbi. And I believe that's partly why we get the Gospels in such a good form, is because they memorized the teaching of Jesus. They didn't just go around with Jesus and say, hey, you're my buddy, you're my friend. They actually learned. What Jesus taught, they learned. And then they passed it on to others. So it's not just hey, we're all buddies and we're all disciples together. There is a discipline to it. And the rabbi would be a teacher of the law, interpreting the Torah to his disciples. So Jesus likewise, but for example, the teaching on the Mount, what it means to obey God's law, and he radically reinterprets the law in terms of mercy and love and all those things. But nevertheless, he is telling them, this is what the Old Testament says, and this is how it applies to you. So it's not just about whether you steal, it's about whether you're envious. It's not just about whether you commit adultery physically, it's about actually your thoughts. So Jesus actually makes it even more difficult in some way. And so in the Gospels, of course, we have a process of discipleship. We've got the calling, Matthew 4, 18 to 22, the calling of the disciples by the Sea of Galilee, which I'm preaching on next week, but wonderful story of Jesus calling the disciples. We've got them experiencing what it is. Come and see, John 1:39. Come and see, experiencing what it is to be with Jesus. We've got following and being with Jesus, going along with him on the way and all those things. We've got learning from Jesus, and we've got that lovely thing, but take my yoke upon you and learn from me. So the learning, I've said it can be difficult, but actually he talks about how his yoke is easy. So the learning is not something that is burdensome, but it is important. And then we learn together. So what it is about the disciples is that they're all learning together on the journey, aren't they? And a lot of their learning is because they have arguments with each other, and Jesus says, actually, you've got it all wrong, come and look at this kid instead. You know, but they're learning together as disciples. Interestingly, disciple, and this is using the NIV, I didn't have a chance to look at it, but disciple, apart from the disciple whom Jesus loved in John, is only used 10 times in the singular. In other words, it's used 260 times in the plural. We are disciples together. We are not a disciple. We are disciples, which I think is quite significant. We are part of a group of Jesus' followers. And of course, then we're commissioned by Jesus. Matthew 10, you've got the sending of the disciples while Jesus is on the 12. We've got Luke sending in Luke 9. We got then Matthew 28 and John 20 about the commissioning of the disciples to continue Jesus' work and make disciples. And in fact, our next study day is going to be more about the making disciples. How do disciples make disciples? I'm running out of time. I'm almost there. So the content of discipleship is that it's most obviously summed up in the Sermon on the Mount, but it's a radical lifestyle. It's different from the world. It affects the whole of our lives. It's about thoughts, words and deeds, and it's about an upside-down lifestyle that actually is attractive, but it actually is different from what the world has. But there is a cost to discipleship as well in the Gospels, isn't there? The foxes have holes and the birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head, is in response to a thing about saying, oh, I'll follow you. And Jesus says, actually, have you thought about it? And obviously Jesus talks about taking up the cross. So the final thing on that is discipleship in the rest of the New Testament. I think that the epistles are actually then about what it means to live as a community of disciples following Jesus. But of course, in the rest of the New Testament, apart from Acts, the word disciple disappears again. But the word learning is there, and what it is to grow and learn. So Paul's letters are instructions to believers on what it means to follow God's call to be his people and to live as he wants us to in every part of our lives. And likewise, the Hebrews, Peter, James, John, all of them are about actually what it means in reality to be the followers of Jesus in a particular place. So it may be in Ephesus or in Philippi or in, when we come to Revelation in those 7 churches, what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus when you're persecuted, when the world is against you? So summarising, and then we're going to go into groups again. If the whole of the Bible is about discipleship, then I believe that the whole of the Bible has something to say to us today. I've not tried to reinterpret what biblical discipleship is about. You can come back to us about that in a minute. Let me summarise a few key features that I think the Bible teaches about discipleship. In the Bible, discipleship is always personal but never individual. So it always affects me, but it never affects me on my own. It always affects me as part of the community of other disciples. It's based on grace, but it calls for obedience. So we don't become a disciple to earn God's favour. God has given us his favour and then calls us to obey him. It involves the whole person, head, heart, hands. That's the know-be-do, or the do-be-do-be-do. The know, be and do. And educationally then it's about knowledge, attitude, skills. So it's not just about knowledge, so it's not just cognitive. It has to affect our person and our behaviour and our life in the world. Discipleship is lifelong, and it requires devotion. And I think that Acts 2:42, they devoted themselves to the teaching, the fellowship, and the breaking of bread and to prayer. That's a sort of summary of what New Testament discipleship is about. Is devoting ourselves to these things that help us grow together. So as for you, continue in what you have learned. This is 2 Timothy chapter 3. And have become convinced of, because you know those from whom you learned it, and how from infancy you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Christ Jesus. All Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting and training in righteousness. So the whole of the Bible is helpful for our discipleship. So that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work, so that we won't be ineffective. What role do small groups have in that? I think we'll take that into our discussion. So what is the role of the small group in enabling this whole understanding of the Bible? What is the role of the Bible in those small groups? So are the small groups focusing on the whole of life and all those things that we've talked about, or are they just going around talking about the love of God in an incessant circle without having that breadth and that depth that we need to affect the whole of our life? Just to say before that, so one of the things that Group Bible Study around the world has found effective is this inductive Bible study, where you use these 3 simple steps, which we also use in quite a lot of our Gold Project courses, of observation. What does the passage actually say? And I find this so often in our small groups. People end up not saying what the passage says. They start talking about something entirely different from what the passage says. So observation, what does it actually say? Not what I think it says or what an expert tells me it says, but what does it actually say? Then secondly, explanation, what does it mean? So we have to actually think, if this is what it says, what does it mean? And sometimes it doesn't always mean quite what we thought it did. So we have to dig a bit deeper. And then application. And if our biblical studies in our small groups do not move to application, then there's no point in them. Actually, it's about transformed life. If we're not looking at how, and one of the great things about our level 1 and 2 courses is at the beginning of every group meeting, and this is a good thing to do, not just in Gold Project, but at the beginning of every group meeting, you reflect back on what did we learn last week and how we put it into practice and how we got on with that. And then at the end of the meeting, you say, well, what do we want to take into the next week, and how can we apply that in the next week? And I am fed up with my own particular small group, where people house group, where people talk Christian jargon, where there are people in the group who are new to faith and people who don't talk Christian jargon. And we've got people who, and I understand why it happens, and I love my group dearly, but I think it's a common thing, and especially groups that have been going on some time, small groups. We get into our own little way of speaking, and we make things and we do things that aren't accessible. And I think often our materials are not accessible. So what I'm going to try and do in this session is to challenge how do we make things accessible. So one of the dangers of small group Bible study is that it can be too cognitive. It can be too much in the head and not so much in the heart and the action. But also, it can be a group Bible study, and I'm absolutely an advocate of group Bible study, but it can disempower those with limited education, where you get an expert in the group who then talks and the other people are disempowered. So the question is, how do we empower people who lack confidence and those without a voice? Because it's also easy for a group to be dominated by those who are educated or think they are educated, those who are confident and extrovert, and those who already have a voice, e.g. the group leader. So the group leader can dominate it and disempower people. So the challenge is, how do we make it accessible to other people, to people who don't have a voice? And in this session, I'm unashamedly going to offer theological education by extension as a model for this. But it's a model that I'm quite happy for you to critique. And I'm going to explain what that is. This is the method that we use in the Gold Project. It's a method that has been used and refined over more than 50 years around the world, and it's based on some basic educational ideas. And I'm not ashamed of saying that study involves education and education. So when we talk about Bible study and we don't think about education, we're not really talking about study, we're talking about having a little nice time together. If you're going to do study, it's about education. If you're going to be a disciple, it's also about education. So I'm not ashamed to use educational terms. And this is what adult education has taught us, is people learn best when they learn in small, appropriate steps. So people generally cannot just pick up a theological book and read it. The general public cannot pick up a biblical book, a theological book, read it and digest it. Because they learn much better when it's broken up into steps. People learn best when they receive immediate feedback on their learning. So if you're a good teacher, you will constantly be asking people their questions and asking them to give you, so that you can give feedback, and asking them how they respond to what you're teaching. Now this is an interesting thing, is that what was discovered in adult education is that people learn best when they learn at their own pace. And this is a problem for classroom-based learning, because when you're in a classroom, everyone is forced to learn at the same pace as everyone else. And therefore, those who struggle to learn quickly can easily get left behind. Or those who learn faster than the group want to move ahead, while those... so actually a classroom is not always the best way for people to learn. People learn best when their learning is interactive. So they discuss things with people, they look at things, they do things. So constantly getting them to do active things. Interestingly, people learn best when their learning is tested. Actually, testing is not a bad thing, it's a friend of learning. But of course, the way that testing has been set up in our society is often problematic, because it makes people feel that they've failed. Now, I like to think of testing is much more like what we believe about the driving test, is that most people can learn to drive. Okay, it may take 2 or 3 times, they may have to be tested 2 or 3 times, but most adults, we believe, have the skills to learn to drive. Well, I believe that it's the same with our Christian education. Most people actually can do it. We just have to give them the skills in the right way and actually test them in a way that enables them rather than disables them. People learn best when their learning is applied, because they're seeing the relevance of what they're learning. And here's an interesting thing. People learn best when what they learn is repeated. Okay? So this is something that we have a problem with in our Bible study groups often. Oh, we've done that before. Good. Do it again.
Yeah.
Why do people go to the gym? Repetition is how you build your body strength. Okay? Repetition is how we build our learning. And actually, we've got into some strange idea in the Western world that if we repeat something, it's something bad. But actually, in learning, repeating is important.
Yeah.
So we need to repeat things. And we need to get that muscle memory and habits. So I understand from both Alcoholics Anonymous and others, that part of the thing that you're trying to do is to build habits. And habits only come by repeating things. So you have to repeat them, and repeat them, and repeat them, so that people actually learn their habits. And then they are able to overcome their other habits. So actually, learning is important, repetition is important. The final thing is, and I could go on, the final thing is that people learn best when they learn from peers. So actually, an expert is not necessarily the best teacher. Someone who's alongside you is often the better teacher. You will learn better from someone who's alongside you than an expert. And that doesn't mean that there's not a good place for experts, but actually, experts are not necessarily the best teachers. So that's an interesting thing for theological colleges that I'm involved in, because actually we like to put an expert in front of the class, but actually how much do they learn from the expert? That's a good question. So TE has developed, I hope it works, has developed these three aspects: personal study, group meetings, and practical application. So these three things repeat and become a cycle of learning. Okay, so I thought I had a video there. I don't have a video. I was going to show you a new video about TE, but it's not there. I'll put the video in my notes. So the video is talking about these three simple steps that you do your personal study, your study at home, and it doesn't necessarily have to be individual study. One of the greatest things that happened to me when we were in India, we used a similar model in India. At a graduation service for our students, they came together, and this lovely old couple, they were probably in their 70s, they may have been even in their 80s. The man came up to me and he said, "David, do you know the best thing we learned from all our studies?" So they've just actually done a degree in this type of learning. And he came to me, "The best thing that we've learned in our studies." And I was thinking, what could it be? Doctrine of atonement? What is it? What is it they've learned? And he said, "Through our studies, my wife and I learned to read the Bible together." And I thought, that is just such a powerful testimony of people. And he said, and we are still doing it. Learning a habit of actually reading together. So you don't have to do your personal study on your own. And we've got a couple in our church where the lady can no longer read because she's had a stroke, and they do their study together. So it doesn't have to be on your own. But you do your personal study, and there's course materials we're going to look at in a moment, set up to empower people with limited education and those who lack confidence. So then there's the group discussion, and what happens in the group discussion is amazing, because the little bit that they've done on their own becomes more than the sum of the parts in the group. Because as people start discussing things in the group, you learn from one another, and you learn from each other's perspectives, and you learn from those who you perhaps thought you wouldn't learn from, and you learn certain things that you never thought that you would learn. So the group meeting is a great opportunity to learn together. And finally then, the focus on application, and this is partly dependent on the facilitator, but trying to think through, well, what does this mean in our lives? How do we apply it? So these are the three parts to what is called theological education by extension. Personal study, group meetings, practical application, and I did have a good video which I will try and get for you a link for. And so the final thing about theological education by extension is that it is dependent on a good facilitator. So the group meeting needs someone who can facilitate and is not just an expert teaching you, but someone who can enable discussion. What we're going to do now for 10 minutes is I'm going to give you a lesson from Pure Gold, which is one of our level 1 courses. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to work on your own. It doesn't matter how far you've got by the end of the 10 minutes, because you are learning at your own pace. You don't need to look at the person next to you and think, "Oh, I haven't got as far as them." You just do those 10 minutes on your own, and then we're going to come to our discussion in groups. And part of our discussion in groups, so we're not actually doing the lesson as a group study, but part of the discussion in the group is to say, well, what is your experience of that? And you may feel, oh, it's so simple, and you may think, I couldn't ask my people to do that. But then think of the person who might find learning inaccessible, and think, actually, so think not only for yourself, but think of others who you might find. We'll get a chance, hopefully, to discuss that in the room who don't Just a very, very brief overview of the Gold Project. You may never have heard of us, but I'd just like to say to people, our vision is the vision of the Reformation, is that the idea that actually if ordinary people can get to understand the Bible, like the ploughboy that Tyndale talked about, not very far from here, that if we can get ordinary people to understand the Bible, it will transform them, their churches, and ultimately society. So actually, believing that the Bible is transformative and the message of the Bible, God speaks through the Bible and it is transformative. If you don't agree with that, that's fine, but that's what our vision is and that's what we believe, that actually ordinary people understanding the Bible, applying it in their daily lives, will transform individuals, church and society.
Amen. Preach it.
So we've got a long history. We started actually before Oak Hill College because the first courses that we offered, or Oak Hill College offered, were written in India and used in India and then in Oak Hill. So in the late 80s, Oak Hill Extension College started. Oak Hill decided they didn't want to use it anymore, so it became separate as Interactive Christian Extension Studies, and it was used in the St Albans area very extensively and very fruitfully. And one of our previous leaders, I think she has about 100 people who've gone into some form of Christian ministry, whether ordained or lay, through the groups that that she led. And then in 2009, that became part of Trinity College here in Bristol as the Open Learning Programme. And then in 2016, end of 2015, beginning of 2016, we became a separate charity. Again, we left friendlily. We left on good terms. We still have good friends at Trinity College, but the vision of us to train all God's people and to serve not just the Anglican Church, all churches, various things, meant that it was good for us to separate and go our separate ways. I'm still officially associate faculty, which is how I got in this morning, and I occasionally teach here. So we have a good relationship with this college, but we're a separate charity, and we deliberately don't want to be just Anglican. And that challenge, Lynn keeps reminding us that we need to make sure we're not just Anglican, but that's a good challenge for us to know. Just briefly, we've had more than 75, I didn't have a chance to update fully, but I did have a quick look, more than 75 groups in the last 20 years in different places. So that's groups, we've had more than 1,100 students, that's different students, and more than 2,500 courses studied. So although you may not know about us, we do feel there's been some impact of the work. And we're part of a worldwide movement, which is the Theological Education by Extension movement. So we have links, as I said, our original courses came from Tafti in India. We still have some good links there because Angie and I work there. We have links with SAM, our new courses, level 1 and level 2 courses are there, and we have links with others. And we've just started, you'll see out there's a course called Come Follow Me. We just agreed to offer that, which I'll talk about in a minute, and that comes from Word of Life. So what we've tried to do over the last 5 years, 6 years, however many years, since 2016 till now.
7 years.
I don't even know the time. But anyway, since we left Trinity College, one of the challenges that people kept asking me is, what do we do after Alpha? And that's what today's been about. Because we had courses at level 3, which were like pre-university, pre-college courses. But what do we do after Alpha? So what we've tried to do is to add 3 levels so that so there's this ongoing journey of learning, and learning what the Bible is about. So I think each of you have got a brochure in your bag. This is in the brochure telling you about the different courses. And we've got a suggested pathway through those courses and encouraging them. Manoj's church have been jointly doing the level 3 courses for many years now.
Yeah. 6 years.
6 years. And the lady who leads, who's coming in the afternoon, who leads that course, has now been also doing some level 2 courses with St Anne's Church here in Bristol, and people from all over the world actually. So yeah, so that's so level 1 we have, and there's on the table out there. There's some samples that you can look at. We've got 3 courses there at level 1. And they're very accessible, and we're going to have a look at one of them in a minute. And then at level 2, the course that is actually 6 books. It takes 2 years if you want to do the whole course, but it's on following Jesus. It's about Jesus' life, but you learn all sorts of things, skills for life and ministry, skills about Bible study, basic theology like the Trinity, basic things about Jesus' humanity and divinity, all sorts of things. As you go through his life, you learn it. You also learn geography, and there's colouring in to do, isn't there?
Yeah.
So those who like colouring in, you know, it's great fun, and yeah. So that's those courses. And then and we will look a little bit more at those courses in our second study day in terms of actually following Jesus. What does following Jesus mean, and how do we disciple people to make disciples? Because one of the key things about that course is the encouragement that people who studied it to start another group and actually disciple other people. And then the level 3 courses, lots of people have questions about the scripture and about the Bible, and these courses are designed really to build confidence. Actually, none of our questions are stupid, and actually some of our questions are really important. So there are difficult questions about Joshua, about about creation. There are questions that actually we need to be not afraid that people ask those questions. And sometimes our small groups in churches, we get afraid of asking those questions, so we end up not dealing with the issues that people have. So that's the level 3 courses, and we'll be looking more at that level of things in our third study day on November the 25th. So that's who we are. Abby's going to say something briefly about Gold Family.
So we are devising a little idea around the Gold Family. We want to build a culture around God Project, centered around family. We want to, as people join, as God leaders join and create groups, you're not isolated, you're not just doing your group. We want to incorporate that as one big family and call it the God Family. And a way that we want to kind of bring that out, we're still developing ideas, it's not concrete, not final, but is to give and receive in both ways. We encourage people to volunteer, to be part of, so some of you guys are doing it as God leaders, to volunteer as giving your time or specialty, like, I don't know if you've got financial skills, anything like that would support the charity as a not business, as an organisation, and financially as well. And in so doing, you'll be part of the God Family, whereby you'll be kind of joining us in a sense, being invited to more events, be part of the actual, the study days, be part of more incorporating you with all that we're doing. And so that's the kind of idea. We'll develop it more, and there'll be more information that we're going to probably pass out in the next few months. So yeah,
Thanks, Abby. So Abby is our marketing officer. She's a great asset to us, and if you've noticed that Zion is around, and he's either with his grandmother or his father today. So thanks, Abby. So just briefly, we're revising the course on prophecy in the Old Testament. That's becoming 2 courses. I'm in the process of that by now. I'm hoping that the first one will be fully revised by the end of the year, and Amanda's brother is part of the group that was giving input into improving that. We have a new course which I said you can look outside, which we're offering in partnership with Word of Life, which is a course that's originally for Muslim background believers. It's available in all sorts of languages, which you can look at the website. It tells you the languages it's available in. But if you happen to have, refugees or people who come from a Muslim background, it's a really good course. It goes through 1 Peter with them, but picks up issues particularly that will address their concerns as people who come from a Muslim background. We also, our level 1 and level 2 courses, because we offer them with SAYAN, we can actually access those in different languages immediately, Spanish. Well, there's a whole thing here. So we've got Arabic, Bahasa Indonesia, Chichewa. You know where Chichewa has come from somewhere in Africa. Malawi, I think. Chinese, both simplified and traditional. English, that's Farsi. This is Cambodian Khmer, Mongolian. So various languages. So if you've got groups of people from different languages, we can access that. And we've also now just literally beginning to offer for the level 1 courses that we offer with SAYAN, a course that can be done on a mobile phone or tablet. And you can ask us more about that. And that's through our partnership with Word of Life and SAYAN. Study groups, we've got study groups in various places, and they're all on the website, I think. Normally I would ask for news from them now, but I know I'm running late already. Is there anyone who would love to share some news about the Gold Project study group? Mara's looking at me, I shouldn't. Is there anyone? We're hoping to start some more groups in Bristol. We've got, I'm meeting some pastors next week. We want to start groups in Bristol at all 3 levels. If you are interested in